Welcome to the 2014 IMF and World Bank Group annual meetings. I'm James King, and I'm joined today by Augusto de la Torre, the chief economist for the World Bank's Latin America and Caribbean division. Augusto, thank you very much for your time today.
Pleasure.
Just the first point, you recently finished some new research for the latest annual meetings, looking at the sort of growth prospects for Latin America. Maybe you can talk us through sort of the key conclusions that you drew from that research.
Well, there are several, but we asked essentially three different questions. The first question was, what is the nature of the cyclical deceleration that the region is experiencing? And in particular, the question as to whether we have already hit bottom or not, and in what countries. The second question is the question of what is the growth rate that we are likely to converge to once the countries begin accelerating. And the third question is the question as to what will happen with this process of great social progress that Latin America experienced over the past decade, where the middle class grew, poverty fell, inequality declined. What may happen with this social progress process in the context of lower growth? So if you wish, I could tell you a little bit about the three. So on the first one, the main conclusion is that Latin America is indeed undergoing a deceleration in the cycle, but the cycle is not the same boom-bust pattern that the region used to experience in the 90s or in the 80s. So this is not a crisis, it is not a collapse, it is more of a conventional business cycle, where different countries find themselves in different points of the deceleration and with different challenges. So it's not a crisis, but it will create some tensions. Second, as regards as to which is the new normal, the new, let's say, non-inflationary growth rate that the Latin American economy could sustain in the absence of the type of strong tailwinds that came from China and commodity prices in the past, the answer is nobody knows. Central banks are going to have to discover and feel their way to discovering what is the growth rate that is what the economists call the potential growth rate without inflation. But a good guess is that it is likely to be around 3% for the region as a whole, which is a low rate and could create tension. And on the third question, which is how will inequality, equality, social equity considerations fare in this situation, one view that we have is that, or one of the big findings of the report, is that in the cyclical sense, as you manage the business cycle, the thing that matters the most for social equity objectives is employment more than growth.
Okay. So you mentioned obviously Brazil in that context of those three findings. And obviously we've seen disappointing sort of GDP data, at least in recent years. And what is your sort of prognosis for Brazil's longer term development, and what do you think needs to happen in order for the country to reform?
Well, Brazil has in front of it a macroeconomic challenge, which is it is very manageable, but it's not going to be free of political challenges. At the macroeconomic level, essentially, if you want a phrase, Brazil needs a tighter fiscal policy so it can have a looser monetary policy. Right now, if you see what's happening, you see that the central bank has less room to maneuver that would be desirable because it's facing inflation. So, and the central bank therefore has been compelled to keep interest rates high. So the fiscal process needs to open room for the central bank to have a more active monetary policy that could come very handy for Brazil, especially to sustain employment in the middle of a deceleration. And then Brazil has, like most countries in the region, a significant structural reform, microeconomic reform time agenda, wherein Brazil obviously has to, the policies will have to result in a Brazil that tilts its economic activity in favor of investment, whereas until now, economic activity was tilted in favor of consumption.
And in terms of foreign direct investment in the region, which markets are likely to be the most attractive over the next couple of years?
I think for starters, Latin America has become a point of attraction for foreign direct investment in magnitudes that we were not used to. When you compare Latin America during the 2000s with the Latin America of the 90s, in the 90s, most of our financing that came from abroad took the form of debt. And that was not unrelated to the fact that we used to have all of these debt crises and so forth. Starting in 2003, many Latin American countries changed the structure of financing away from debt towards equity. And what happened during the 2000s is that most countries in Latin America are now predominantly financed through foreign direct investment. There is a question as to whether foreign direct investment has been a conduit for learning and technology transfer as much as one would have liked. There are questions as to whether it has perhaps been too concentrated on certain sectors like extractive industries. But the fact of the matter is that foreign direct investment is now the main source of financing for Latin America in its capital account, and is likely to remain like that. And countries are running FDI at a rate of 5% of GDP per year. So I think that is changed Latin America.
Augusto, thank you very much for your time today. Thank you.
Oh, my pleasure.